Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants, and welcome to this session of our Islam Study Circle. Uh, the verses that we are going to study today are verses 32 to 33 of Surah Araf, which is the seventh surah. Let me read out the text of these verses to you, and after that, we will, inshallah, proceed and discuss them after translating them. So the text reads, "Kul man harrama zinatallahi allati akhraja li'ibadihi wat-tayyibati min ar-rizq. Qul hiya lilladhina amanu fil hayati ad-dunya khalisatan yawm al-qiyamah. Kadhalika nufassilu al-ayati liqaumin ya'lamun. قل إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن والإثم والبغي بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطانا وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون." Ask them who has the categories which have been forbidden by God. And we must question ourselves whenever we read something that prohibition, as far as the Almighty is concerned, He has made it amply clear, extremely clear in these verses. And any a prohibition which comes to our mind because of culture, because of maybe understanding in a way that we have received from our parents or from our society, all these understandings and these cultural traditions must be analyzed, particularly if they are actually saying that something is haram, prohibited or not, that these are the five categories which the Almighty has actually made prohibited, and any prohibited act or deed or action must fall in either of these five categories. And if it does not, then it's a litmus test to tell us that that particular thing is not forbidden. And as you can see, the title of this group of verses is that the final pleasures of life are the final pleasures of life prohibited. And of course, this question mark is meant to tell us, or meant to provoke us to the fact that as far as concerned, you see, zikr is a comprehensive word of the Quran. It is used for all sorts of embellishments, adornments, things which beautify our lives. And you know what the Almighty has said, that He has said that apart from the edibles which He has actually proscribed in earlier verses or some of the other verses of the Quran, as far as these pleasures of life are concerned, these adornments of life are concerned, the Quran says that they are specially for the servants of the Almighty, the people who are obedient to Him. لِعِبَادِهِ, as the verse is, أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ. And it is because of their courtesy, or through them, that these adornments and these pleasures of life have also been made available to non-believers in this world. However, in the hereafter, only and only the believers will be the beneficiaries of these adornments and of these pleasures. And then it is said that as far as prohibition is concerned, as far as the fact that some of these pleasures of life may be prohibited is concerned, then you have to bear in mind that the Almighty has forbidden nothing except besides what He has already said in His earlier verses regarding prohibited edibles. What else is prohibited is classified in these five categories. And if you can see from the verses, the first thing that these verses say is, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. So the first prohibited category are vulgar acts, are lewd acts, are things which belong to lewdness, licentiousness, and whether they are hidden or whether they are open, whether they are outside ourselves, or whether they are inside ourselves. Of course, Mama Batan would mean that while we are imagining things and fantasizing about things, of course, we cannot avoid fantasies and imaginations come to our mind because this is a prompt of Satan. But what needs to be understood is that we have to withhold ourselves from these promptings and from these suggestions. So this forms the latent part of these fawahish, or the things which have been prohibited the uh, regarding the fact that these are vulgar acts. And as far as openly vulgar acts are concerned, of course, all of us know that what vulgarity is and what constitutes this vulgarity, and it specifically relates to sexual pleasures which are derived from an individual other than one's wife. And similarly, it also refers to some of the other blatant things of licentiousness that exist in our society. Then the next category, which is mentioned here, is wal ithm, which means usurping rights. When the word ism is used in this way, the way it is used with baghi, it actually refers to the fact that you are uh, usurping the rights of other people. You are not granting them their rights. You are eating up their rights. And these are all sorts of rights. It could be the rights of the orphans. It could be the rights of your parents, of your siblings, of your kin, everyone. And of course, it also refers to the fact that you usurp the rights of people who are innocent, usurp the rights of people who are weak in the society, and you get hold of what belongs to them forcefully, maybe, or maybe covertly, or it could be covert or overt, but you have used your guile and deception to usurp them. And then look at the third category, which this verse actually spells out, and that is al-baghi bighayr al-haq, which means wrongful rebelliousness. Of course, rebelliousness is also always wrongful, but the conditional clause bighayr al-haq, of course, here is meant to signify the intensity of rebelliousness. And when it says that rebelliousness, it comes, of course, to the fact that we become rebellious to God. We openly challenge the law. We openly take the law in our own hands. We openly defy and take pride in defying the directives of God. So this comes under al-baghi bi ghayr al-haq. Of course, it is bi ghayr al-haq because it has no justification. It is an absolutely wanton, unjustified act. And then the fourth thing which is mentioned is وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا, that you worship what He did not sanction. Sultan here means the sanction of the Almighty, or any proof which the Almighty has provided us to worship other people or other beings besides Him, other deities besides Him. So the biggest case which is made against polytheism, and the Almighty Himself has actually made this case, is that had it been something of a belief, then the only person which could have informed creatures about the fact that there are more than one God is God Almighty Himself. He would have revealed this in His scriptures. He would have told this to His prophets, but He never did so. Which actually means that whoever invents deities, whoever associates partners with God, is actually doing something which has no sanction from God. And at other places, precisely for this reason, it is called iftara Allah. It is imputing a falsehood, imputing a lie towards the Almighty. And because it has no justification, the Almighty is extremely annoyed at all such acts of associating partners with Him. And precisely, viewers, for this reason, actually, the Almighty says that everything else can be forbidden. But as far as willful, deliberate polytheism is concerned, the Almighty will never forgive such a thing. because of the fact that person had no sanction. He disregarded any proof or lack of proof, and therefore he is culpable in this regard. And then finally, the fifth thing, dear viewers, which is mentioned here is أن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون, which means that you ascribe to God what you know not. And you ascribe something to God which you have no knowledge of. And this actually is referring to the act of religious innovations or bid'ah, which we often come across, in which you regard something to be part of God's sanction or part of God's religion without any proof. You have no knowledge of it, and you do it out of your own self, your own fancy, or your own desire. And hence it is called that it is something which is not sanctioned by the Almighty Himself. And أن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون, that you say about God something that you do not know. And this, of course, is something which has to be avoided at all costs. So if we just enumerate these five things, besides those edibles which have been mentioned in verses prior to the ones that we are just discussing, the five categories are: number one, al-fawahish, means licentiousness and all vulgar acts. So al-fawahish ma zahara minha wa ma batan, what is apparent and what is hidden. This is the first category. The second is wal ism, which means usurpation of rights. You bungle the rights of other people. Do not let them have their rights. You usurp them. And the third thing is al-baghi bighayr al-haq, wrongful rebelliousness, that you are not, you are actually rebelling against something, which means that you're openly challenging its verdict. It could be the word of God, it could be the law of the land, it could be anything in which you take the law and order in your own hands. And then the fourth thing is polytheism. وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا, that you are associating partners with God about which you have no sanction from God Himself. And the fifth thing is religious innovation or bid'ah, which means أَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that you impute to God what we do not have any knowledge of. So these are the five categories, viewers, that have been spelled out in these verses. And whenever we find someone saying something of the sort that for Allah, such and such a thing is prohibited and such a thing is proscribed or not, then the litmus test or the scale or the balance in which we can weigh whatever the person is presenting are these five categories, in which we can just check out whether something is wrong or not by simply presenting it and trying to understand whether that thing falls in these five categories or not. So as such, these verses are extremely important. They have a twofold importance. Not only do they tell us that the finite pleasures of life are not prohibited, and they have been provided specially by the Almighty to the believers in this world, and through their courtesy, the non-believers also are able to enjoy them. But in the hereafter, they will be specifically for the believers, as the verse says, خَالِصَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ قُلْ هِيَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا خَالِصَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. They are for the believers and, for example, other people. But in the hereafter, these pleasures shall only be specific to the believers. So this is one message of the verse regarding the fact that the finite pleasures of life are not prohibited. And since once this is stated, this question comes to mind, that then what is exactly prohibited? So the text goes on to describe those five categories, which I have just singled out before you and highlighted, to tell us that these are the five things prohibited, and all other things besides these five categories are allowed, and we can benefit from them. So with these words, viewers, we come to the end of this first section. And let me now go on to the next section, which is the hadith of the day. And this is actually a hadith from Imam Bukhari's Al-Jami al-Sahih. And I have titled it as Undue Elevation of the Prophet. This is something which most nations of God have become guilty of. They elevate the person of the Prophet sent to them to an unwarranted status, and as such they are guilty of this ulu, as the Quran calls it. So this narrative, viewers, is from the famous companion Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, سمعت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول لا تطروني كما أطرت النصارى نصارى ابن مريم فإنما أنا عبده فقولوا عبد الله ورسوله. Umar reports, I heard the Prophet say, do not elevate me from my status the way the Christians or the Nasara elevated Jesus. Kama afrat al-Nasara ibn Maryam. Far above the status which he actually has. And then he says, I am only God's servant. فَإِنَّمَا أَنَا عَبْدُهُ. I am only God's servant. So call me a servant of God and his messenger. So this is, since this is something which takes place amongst our various nations of the followers of the prophets, so the prophet has warned us regarding this pitfall. As you can see clearly that this pitfall tells us that we have to refrain ourselves from unnecessarily, unduly, unfoundedly elevating the person of the prophet beyond the status he actually occupies. And this is something which, of course, we know that the prophet right before him, the prophet Jesus, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this happened to his people. And not only they elevated him to the status of a deity, but they, of course, made him lot more in this regard than he actually was. And even today, they regard him to be the Son of God. And being the Son of God, he is no less than God himself. And of course, this is what the Quran at other places has warned believers when it says, Ya Ahlal Kitab la taghlu fi dinikum. O people of the book, do not go beyond limits in your religion, which means that you do not commit acts which are crossing the limits which are set by religion. So this is what the Prophet has warned Muslims as well, his followers as well. So he knew that this might happen with his followers as well, as it happened with the Prophet Jesus, that they would start elevating him or giving him certain powers or certain responsibilities or certain abilities, which of course are the attributes of the Almighty himself. And lo and behold, this has what actually happened, that we have ended up, or part of the Ummah has ended up, elevating the status of the Prophet of Islam, or Prophet Muhammad, to a place which is almost the same as God himself. For example, when you pray before him, you prostrate before him, or you supplicate before him, or you request him that you are a person who will make our prayers and supplications come true before the Almighty. So instead of praying to the Almighty directly, they regard him to be an intermediary. And as an intermediary, therefore, what happens is that they give him, without actually, of course, acknowledging the fact or stating the fact, certain rights which only God has. And as such, they are guilty of perhaps inadvertently committing acts of polytheism. So this is something which the Prophet warned, and we can see that in spite of his warning, few people paid heed to it, and a lot of people in this world today, we can find that they have elevated the status of the Prophet Muhammad much more. And look what he himself has said in this particular narrative. He says that فَقُولُوا عَبْدُ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولُهُ. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just Abdullah, servant of God and his messenger, and nothing else. So do not elevate me beyond this status. As far as I'm concerned, I am his messenger, I'm the messenger of the Almighty, and I am also his servant, of course, his abd, which means a true obedient and a true worshipper of the Almighty, who believes in him, who not only follows his directives in letter and spirit, but also takes these pains to call other people in his surroundings to this wonderful truth that has dawned upon him. So this is a very important warning which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has sounded for the Muslim Ummah, and unfortunately we see people not abiding by the bounds of this warning. So let's move on, viewers, to the next part of our study circle, and this is the Bible verse of the day. And these are in fact 3 verses which I have selected from the Gospel of Luke, And let's see what these verses have to say to us. He remember, these are the words of Jesus himself. He who is true in a little is true in much. He who is false in small things is false in great. If then you have not been true in your use of the wealth of this life, who will give you, who will give into your care the true wealth? And if you've not been true in your care of the property of other people, who will give you that which is yours? So, such moving and such beautiful words which the prophet Jesus is reported to have said. And it shows that a person, the character of a person, the integrity of a person, the honesty of a person, and he starts off by saying that a person who is dishonest in a small amount is bound to be dishonest in a large amount. Because if he does not care that even these small amounts can be usurped, they can be bungled, they can be embezzled, then he will have no qualms, he will have no remorse in just confiscating large amounts. And then he says, he who is small in false things is false in great. So he tells small lies. If a person has given himself to speaking small lies, small false things, he will have, of course, no problem in gulping large or bigger lies. And hence, what actually the prophet Jesus is trying to tell us, that we have to be trustworthy and faithful in even the smallest of amount in every deed. We just cannot think that, okay, this small mistrust or this small dishonesty can work and will not fall into big dishonesties. On the contrary, when you are dishonest in a small amount, this slowly increases and you are bound to end up being dishonest and untrustworthy in bigger and greater enterprises. And look then what he has said. If then you have not been true in your use of wealth of this life, who will give into your care the true wealth? Of course, the reference here is to the kingdom of God, to the final paradise, the final station of every believer, and the wealth which the Almighty will entrust us there. So the point that he's making is that who, of course, referring to the God, but how can the Almighty entrust them to a larger wealth when they have been dishonest in a smaller part of that wealth? And if you have not been true in your care of the property of other people, who will give you that which is yours? So, which belongs to us, of course, which the Almighty wants to give us, the paradise of the hereafter. Why would He do that if we are being dishonest in usurping the rights of other people, in going after their rights, in not caring about the property or the things which have been entrusted to us? So it's a case in point which Prophet Jesus has made in such beautiful words, that we have to be fastidious, we have to be very particular, even in small amounts, even in things that we might just disregard in life. We must not disregard them. We have to be honest to the dot. We have to be honest in every penny, in any iota of any measure that comes to us. So this is what actually the prophet Jesus is forcefully employing, and of course the manner in which he has done so is always, as the case is, such it's so simple and at the same time so appealing, and its simplicity is its real force. It is not something which he says in flowery language or in garbled tones. He says all these things in such beautiful short sentences, at times by giving examples to which are these examples are always appealing to the common mind, that people are they readily grasp them and they readily understand them. And I always make this point that it is a big and a huge misfortune that Muslims generally don't read the Bible. They don't read in the New Testament and the Old Testament and the Proverbs of Solomon and the Psalms of David and the other scriptures of the Prophet, and they can only find out what they have missed or what they are missing if they pick up the Bible and start reading it and start treating it to be a book from the Almighty, although it is present with us in the form of translations. So viewers, if you have any question regarding this part of our segment, please let me know, and otherwise we will proceed to the next part of our study segment, which is basically something which relates to common issue that we discuss. So I can see Madam Rafia Khwaja. Uh, Kindly unmute your mic because it has been self-muted. Madam, please unmute your mic. You have to unmute it from your, yes.
Saleem, Dr. Saad, my question is not relating to the segment you just talked about, but it's a question which has been on my mind. As we know that taking sood is haram, but my question is that we always are taking loans from the Muslim countries because we are always short of funds, economy is bad. And why is it that when we take loans, the Muslim countries want us to pay back with high interest? This is happening even when the Muslim countries know that we have a very difficult time. So what is happening is that our government is taking loans to pay back just the interest of previous loans. Now, what is the position regarding this in Islam for the Muslim countries?
So I think we have discussed this in some of our earlier classes regarding the issue of interest, that as far as interest is concerned, charging interest is what is prohibited absolutely, and which the Almighty has actually prescribed and prohibited in the 3 or 4 verses which are mentioned in the Quran regarding interest. Not at one place in the Quran is giving interest regarded as prohibited. Of course, giving interest is something in which the person who is giving interest, he is oppressed. He is actually paying out of his pocket much more than he had given, and he's not part of any oppression. All that he is part of is the fact that when he needs money, he has to pay back extra money. So first of all, we have to understand that as far as acquiring money on interest is concerned, which is of course means borrowing money on interest, this was never proscribed, never prohibited by the Almighty, never prohibited by the Quran. And there was a time in the era of the Prophet when interest was totally outlawed at the state level. It was then that this whole issue came up, and the Prophet said that in such cases, that giving and paying of interest both is prohibited. And if that is not the case, then we have to stick by the Quran. And the Quran clearly says that it's only interest which is being charged but is forbidden. And let me also clarify here that the hadith which is generally used to signify the fact that that interest is something which cannot be even paid. So that is based on a misunderstanding. And in some of our talks and lectures, you can see that hadith. If you want some details, it will be slightly more in detail if I have to explain that. Otherwise, I'm just going to make a brief comment that as far as that hadith is concerned, as I said, the Quran has nothing to say regarding paying of interest. Only as far as charging interest does it prohibit it. But on the other hand, there is a hadith because of which this general view has been formed that borrowing on interest has also been forbidden. That has been interpreted erroneously and exceeding the Arabic language of that particular narrative. And you can please look it up in some of our lectures. So I think if I summarize my answer to you, it would be that borrowing is something on interest is something which is never prohibited. However, in spite of this, what is perhaps what we call closer to common sense and closer to our economic sense is that borrowing in itself is something which should be avoided, and we should try to remain within our own means as far as possible. But at times borrowing becomes a necessity, especially in our capitalistic economies. So in such cases, if you have to acquire a loan on interest, there is no harm in it. The only thing is that you have to be aware that you have to pay back that, not only that loan, but the interest over and above that. And that is not something which can ever be waived off, because you have made this contract with the country from which you have borrowed that you have to pay back that additional amount besides the loan as well.
Sorry, Dr. Shehzad, my question was that the Muslim countries, don't they feel that we are in a bad way and we are so downtrodden that they, being our Muslim brothers, would not charge us such high interest or waive the interest? It's not on a personal basis. This is government to government. So maybe I'm not understanding it.
You see, as far as as people are concerned, who are you're referring to rich Muslim countries lending out to poor Muslim countries and charging interest, then of course that is something which is even prohibited by religion. What to speak of our own selves? So it does not allow charging of interest. So if a rich Muslim country is lending a poor Muslim country and charging interest, then that interest is absolutely not allowed. And this is something which we are doing against the dictates of the Quran. However, as I said, that this is seldom the case. I mean, though this does go on. For example, Saudi Arabia or maybe some of the other countries do so. But that's not to my own knowledge. I'm just answering it in principle that if a rich Muslim country does so, then of course it is not doing anything which is in line with Islamic injunctions. Okay, so thank you very much. Let's move on to the next part of our study circle, and which is that issue that we normally discuss. And today, viewers, I would like to discuss a concept across all of us, something which we all of us come across. And because of this all-pervasive nature of this, whatever I'm going to discuss, we have lost sight of whether what we are doing is right or wrong, whether it is even sanctioned by our own conscience or not. And that is guarding our gaze. You see, the biggest thing which is needed for self-purification, for self-elevation, for spiritual advancement, or I should say one of the biggest things, that is that your eyes should be clean. Your eyes should not take undue liberty in gazing at the opposite gender, in gazing at the physical attributes of the opposite gender. Whatever that opposite gender is wearing is his or her business. That's something that he or she has to look into. But as far as a person who feasts his or her eyes on the physical attributes of the opposite gender, then this is the first step towards sexual licentiousness, sexual excessiveness. It leads us to things which at times are absolutely uncalled for. And other than that, it contaminates our soul. And the biggest disadvantage of such a behavior is that one starts to lose interest in one's spouse. For married couples, this plays a real havoc in their lives. When they do not guard their gaze, when they show their interest, even if it is for a perfunctory moment or a temporary moment, maybe by viewing pornography or by doing such things in real life, they might think that they are doing something that is something which is within the bounds of religion because they're not doing adultery or not committing fornication. Then they must know that their prophet has told them that a person who gazes in this manner at the opposite gender, he commits the adultery of the eye. And of course, this is a symbolic thing. And today in Western countries, even in Eastern countries, this has become a norm that people stare at each other, they ogle at each other, they study and take pleasure in take notice of the physical attributes of the opposite gender. And when I say physical attributes, I specifically refer to the sexual organs which the Almighty has asked us to cover as far as possible. So we have to understand that if we have to become purified individuals, if we have to become individuals who can totally remain devoted to their spouses, who will not have any inclination, not have any proclivity towards any other than his or her own wife or husband, then we have to guard our gaze from taking undue liberty. And that is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at one place has said that the first gaze is prohibited because it's, of course, accidental. So you have to turn away your first gaze as soon as it happens. And people wrongly think that the Prophet has actually sanctioned the first gaze. So the first gaze at someone is okay, you must not look up a second time. This is an absolute mockery of what the Prophet said. He never said this. He said the first gaze is accidental because at times you're walking or you just strolling through and you you catch a glimpse of the opposite gender in a way that you should not. So you should immediately turn your eyes away, or you should turn your attention away. And in fact, Fadl ibn Abbas, one of the cousins of the Prophet, he is reported to have said that when he actually was staring at the opposite gender. He was staring at a woman. So the Prophet very tactfully came to him, and he just turned his head to one side and just made him realize that this is not the right thing to do. So, my dear viewers, this is something which I just pointed out has become an alien thing in this world. It's become something which we don't even take notice of. It's become something which we take as a given, which we think that can happen anytime, and if there's no problem with it, and this has in fact become a norm. And if a person tries to protect his eyes, he's actually mocked at. A mockery is made of him, and he's actually he's made fun of. So whether someone makes fun of us or not, that's another thing, and we should not actually care about him. We have to care about our inner purification, because we know that the Almighty has told us that only people who are purified individuals will earn His pleasure. He will be pleased by people and rewarded by He will reward those people who will be who have purified themselves from inside. They have cleansed themselves from inside. It's like scrubbing a bowl and making it clean and shining it and polishing it. And this is like scrubbing our soul. So when we scrub our soul, the thing which enters our soul is actually through our eyes. Our eyes see, and whatever they see, they get affected by it. Emotions are connected to what our sight actually sees. Whatever we see has an effect on our emotions, and when those emotions are stirred up, we know that what happens, and not only our inner purification is sacrificed, but also at times we might take liberty and we might end up doing things which are absolutely prohibited. So this was a thing that I actually wanted, and I would invite, including myself, each and every one of us, that we must pay attention to our own inner purification. And the first step in this inner purification is to guard our gaze from taking undue liberty. We must concentrate, if we have such a desire, on our spouses, and that is all. We must not fantasize, or we must not view through our real eyes things which might pleasure us, but of course they are something which are absolutely, they play havoc to our married life. So with these words, dear viewers, we come to an end to our session, and I will now unmute the mics of people who have questions. So I can see Mr. Mushtaq Khan. I'm going to unmute your mic, sir, and you can proceed with your question. Just a moment. So please go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a question about this gaze issue. I live in the United States. We see these women all the time, and nobody is gazing at each other. I think there is a problem with our society. I'm talking about the Muslim society. The women are so protected that in a weird way, the adults, the male, just have that bad habit. Even in Perda, they are looking at women.
Right.
So I think nobody cares in the United States. After the initial look, it doesn't matter who the person is, what they are doing. It's totally irrelevant.
Right.
I think it's, saying that in the Western civilization is a vulgar system and all that. It's not so at all. Nobody gazes women in the Western society. They're just your colleague, your co-workers, and that's it.
Right.
That
So I
sexual
agree
thing
with
does
you.
not even appear.
Yeah, I do agree with
I
you.
would
The
like
only
to
thing is,
make a
yeah,
comment on
please,
that.
yeah. So as I said, that this is something which is, I mean, it's not. I'm not singling out any society. It's evil that might be found anywhere, even in the most protective of societies, most clean of societies. This happens maybe even in a small minority, and there could be this variation of very small to a very large group. But you see, what we are studying here is something in principle. Whether it's happening at some place or not is not our business. Of course, if it's not happening somewhere, it's very good. However, if it is happening somewhere, then we have to be careful about that. So the bottom line is that it's not that we are singling out a particular society. What we are saying is that if there is such an instance that we've just discussed, then we have to not take liberty in this, and we have to be protective, and we have to guard our gaze. And actually, at times, our as you call this, immunity has is developed in Western countries, in which, because of the fact that things far greater than physical attributes have developed, and people have crossed the limits in some of the other areas. For example, they are able to freely view nudity, as is the case with, of course, many other societies as well. So at times, when you go across a certain limit and you have seen more than what you're actually liable to see or warranted to see, then things which are much less than that, they make no difference to you. So what I'm saying is, at times you are exposed to such an extreme that lesser exposure to the same thing does not count even. That is one thing. And the other thing I do see that there are many Western societies in which this is not an issue; it's a non-issue. But as I said, this is something that we might have to teach our children, that we might have to be careful our own selves as well, because you see, uh, this is something which is a desire which can arise in any person as a human being. So without focusing or singling out any particular society, it's a principal guidance that we should actually consider in our daily lives.
Yeah,
So I don't see any more questions. So inshallah, we'll meet up next Saturday, same time. Until then, take care, and it's goodbye and Khuda Hafiz.